Okay, so Netflix released its first animated series of Castlevania in 2017, adapting the beloved Konami video game franchise of the same name. Created by Adi Shankar and written by Warren Ellis, the series ran from 2017 to 2021. In 2023, a second series was adapted, Castlevania Nocturne. Both series have been recognized for elevating the standard for animated video game adaptations and have helped renew interest in the Castlevania franchise overall. For this video, I wanted to take a deeper look into the adaptation and suggest a possible rewrite scenario. And I want to preface this by saying that I subjectively love Castlevania, the games and the series, from the aesthetic to the atmosphere to the lore. And writing is hard. As an aspiring writer myself, I know firsthand how big the difference between critiquing and writing is. And if I were to publish my work someday, I will delete this video, yes. We can all judge a published story and look at it objectively to see its flaws. So I first and foremost try to put myself in the shoes of the writers to see what their intentions with certain decisions may have been. While their narrative and structural ideas are very understandable, with my input on this, I wanted to analyze how a different approach could have been more satisfying for old game fans and new viewers alike. With that said, spoiler warning for the Castlevania games, Netflix adaptation, Attack on Titan and Fullmetal Alchemist, for reasons you will see. The video games. The series is based on the Japanese video games of the same name. Now, the video games are its own complicated world, and for the sake of this video, I will try to break it down more concisely and keep it short. Therefore, I will only focus on the chronological order of the story, not the game releases. Because some earlier story plots were released in later games, the plot elements need to be in order for a rewrite. In summary, the Castlevania series follows a centuries-long battle between the Belmont clan, a family of legendary vampire hunters, and Dracula, the immortal lord of the vampires. Dracula regularly resurrects every 100 years and tries to plunge the world into darkness. A Belmont or one of their allies must enter his castle and defeat him. This setup is renewed by his constant return. 1094 – Lament of Innocence. The plot begins with Leon Belmont, a knight who learns that his fiancée has been kidnapped by the vampire Walter Bernhardt. His friend, the former knight Matthias, has turned against God after losing his wife to illness. Unbeknownst to Leon, Matthias wants to take revenge on God and manipulates events so that Leon will slay Walter Bernhardt. Leon kills Walter using a whip infused with magical power, created by his vampire-bitten fiancée sacrificing her soul, which becomes the Belmont family's signature weapon. After defeating Walter, Matthias takes the vampire's soul, now the Crimson Stone, and reveals himself to Leon as Dracula. He curses humanity, vowing to return again and again to destroy the world. Between 1094 and 1476, the Belmonts become famous vampire hunters, to the point of getting exiled from society. Dracula remarries with Lisa and has a son, Adrian. From the 15th century onward, different iterations of a Belmont family member fight against Dracula and take him and his castle down. 1476 – Dracula's Curse. Trevor and his allies including Ziffa Bernardis, a magician, Grand Dynasty, a thief, and Alucard, Dracula's renamed son, work together to stop him from torturing humanity after they unjustly killed his second wife. The first Netflix adaptation was loosely inspired by this game. 1479 – Curse of Darkness. Dracula's curse is still affecting the world, even after his death. Hector, one of his forge masters, had gotten disillusioned with Dracula's wrath and betrayed him. His wife is accused of witchcraft and her execution is orchestrated by Isaac, another one of Dracula's forge masters. Hector sets out to kill Isaac, but it turns out that Death himself has manipulated Isaac to lure Hector and use his body as a new host for Dracula's resurrection. However, it's Isaac's body that is used as a host, but Hector manages to defeat both Dracula and Death. 1576 – The Adventure. Christopher Belmont steps up to confront a returning Dracula, but before he can actually defeat him, Dracula can escape just in time as a bat. 1591 – Belmont's Revenge. Dracula escaped Christopher's whip and waits until Christopher has an heir and kidnaps his son to corrupt him. Christopher has to defeat him and save his son. 1691, Castlevania. In this first iteration of the game, Simon Belmont storms Dracula's castle, defeats him but gets cursed for 7 years. And in 1698, in Simon's quest, he has to resurrect Dracula in order to lift his curse and piece together his remains to kill him again. 1748, Harmony of Dissonance. Just Belmont stops the resurrection of Dracula. His friend Maxim tried to gather remains of the vampire lord to prove he can beat him. He gets corrupted by Dracula's magic and kidnaps his friend Lidi. Just destroys Dracula and frees Lidi and Maxim. 1792, Rondo of Blood. The Dark Priest Shaft resurrects Dracula and tries to find him a new wife. Richter Belmont's girlfriend is one of these women, so he has to save her and other villagers from the castle with the help of his new ally Maria Renard. 1797, Symphony of the Night. Shaft lays a dark curse on Richter and takes control of his body to awaken Dracula again. Alucard awakens from his 300-year slumber and defeats a resurrected Dracula to put the castle to rest again. After this, Richter passes the whip to the Morris clan and disappears. There are of course more games featuring the Morris clan and new vampires like Elizabeth Bathory and Jolta Fuentes, who both actually appeared in Nocturne. But for purposes of this video, I'll focus on the Belmont clan. The next Belmont to grace the scene would be Julius Belmont. Dracula's final resurrection took place in 1999, trying to destroy all of mankind. Julius, with the help of Alucard, the Belnades, and other allies, defeats Dracula for good. In a ceremony, Dracula's powers and castle are sealed away inside a solar eclipse, ending his generational cycle. Even though Castlevania's story doesn't end here, I will stop at Julius Belmont, the last of his clan. The era of the remakes. While the show has gotten a lot of praise and is still regarded as one of the best video game adaptations, hardcore fans of the source material still feel like the two series didn't do the games justice in terms of storytelling, faithfulness, or cinematic experience. A lot of them even feel like Netflix shouldn't have adapted the games at all. This brings us to the topic of recent trends and why I think Castlevania as an adaptation actually works. Because adaptations aren't always a bad thing if they make sense. For example, remaking every single iconic animated Disney movie seems pointless. The reason why Disney is so legendary today is because they pulled themselves out of financial ruin time and time again with innovation. Think of the 90s Renaissance or the 2010s revival. What's the point of watching the same movie but in live action? You could argue to correct some flaws maybe, like for example Princess and the Frog. But then why not make a new original movie with a new black princess with better optics instead of keeping her as an animal and having questionable race dynamics in the movie? Would two of them be too much in the princess lineup, Disney? Remaking an existing plot doesn't have to be pointless either, as we saw with the Wings Saga reboot. What started as a great idea, planning to deepen the more simplistic animated plot, turned into huge backlash from fans pertaining to the writing and whitewashing. Adapting source material, say a video game, from one medium into another works. The fandom, the world, and lore are already established, while translating it into a new series still requires work and innovation. The Netflix adaptation. For Castlevania, Netflix decided to adapt one or multiple games into one cohesive series with multiple seasons, which provides the luxury of producing multiple stories inspired by different games in the Castlevania universe. Netflix's first entry with the property was Castlevania in 2017, which mostly adapted Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, with Trevor Belmont as the protagonist. Let's look at what happens in these 4 seasons. Season 1 consists of 4 episodes, sets up Dracula and Lisa's love story, the subsequent death of Lisa, and introduces protagonist Trevor, an exiled vampire hunter who reluctantly makes it his mission to protect people from night creatures released by Dracula. The season sees him meeting Ziffa Belnades, a magician, An Alucard, Dracula and Lisa's son. It ends with the three forming a group to stop the vampire lord. Season 2 follows up on the previous one and shows the trio looking for Dracula's castle. The War Council is introduced, including other vampires from around the world. Most notably the manipulative vampire queen Carmilla. Two human forge masters, Isaac and Hector, are helping Dracula forge demons out of dead human bodies. Throughout the season, Trevor and his allies are looking for the castle, and by the end the trio storms Dracula's home, with Alucard killing his father. Carmilla takes Hector as prisoner to forge for her and her sisters, while Isaac gets banned into a desert by Dracula. Season 3 is a bit more scattered. After Dracula's demise, Trevor and Ziffa battle night creature attacks, which are at last revealed to be orchestrated by a cult, masked as a priester group. Their mission is to resurrect Dracula. Isaac wanders through different countries and builds a massive army of night creatures, heading to Carmilla's castle to get revenge on her and Hector for betraying Dracula. Carmilla and her sisters scheme to conquer more human lands, with Hector getting enslaved by them. Alucard, meanwhile, lonely in the castle, takes in two students only to be betrayed by them and ultimately killing them, becoming more like his father. The fourth and last season deals with the culmination of each plot arc. Trevor, Ziff, and Alucard unite to stop a resurrection of Dracula. Trevor seemingly sacrifices himself against the ultimate opponent, death, but survives. Isaac defeats Carmilla, makes up with Hector, and chooses a peaceful life. Hector gains freedom from Lenore, who steps into sunlight and kills herself. Dracula and Lisa are resurrected peacefully and leave the world's conflict behind them. In order to, justify why a rewrite would even be necessary, I will provide some critiques for overall issues and for the characters. Even though that's not what I personally like to do, because again, writing is hard. And I'm not someone who needs to have very thought out writing and plotting to enjoy a story. But since I'd like to provide my own version of an adaptation, I will also review the Netflix version. Before we get into the big critiques of the show, there are more subjective points to be made, which more so speak to my personal taste. For one, in my opinion, the constant and awkward cursing directly opposes the more elegant and high-spoken nature that the show seems to have intended. The humor often feels out of place and depends a lot on the cursing.
He shouldn't die. Yes, fuck you.
Also, the dialogue is somewhat over-explanatory, even when trying to sound epic.
Finding things and recognizing things is what we do. You are absolutely a thing.
So, to start off the objective review section, there's two main faults that I feel like hindered the series. 1. Pacing and causality. Starting out all the way in Season 1, one of the major issues with the show is that the plot isn't influenced by causality. Things just happen without any real causes or motivations behind them. Ideally, every single plot action should inform the next one. So instead of saying this happens, then this happens, and then this happens, ideally you say this happens and therefore this happens, and because of that, this happens. It gives the story and all of its details purpose and doesn't feel like pure luck or coincidence. The forming of the main trio in Season 1 shows this problem off perfectly. Starting at Episode 2, a drunk Trevor is introduced at a bar. Even the Castlevania wiki describes him as coming across Greshit, implying it was by chance. He gets into a fight at the bar and then leaves. He then just so happens to come across two priests bullying a speaker and rescues him. The speaker tells him about his grandchild being lost in the catacomb by looking for the sleeping soldier. There, Trevor just so happens to find the statue, encountering a Cyclops. After killing the monster and revitalizing Ziffa, the speaker's grandchild, he teams up with her and helps her find the sleeping soldier. They just so happen to fall through the floor while fighting demons. The soldier is revealed to be Alucard. He fights Trevor, but then they both decide to stop Dracula together. This is how our main trio forms. 3 episodes seem a bit too long to hit these plot points. Important elements are rushed, but at the same time, not really much happens. The pacing therefore is all over the place since a lot of time is taken to have unnecessary dialogue or fight scenes. The writers rush all the action points and mini-climaxes without really establishing character setups or world building. Lisa's love to Dracula, for example, takes up the whole first episode and is the inciting incident, but her legacy and how she affected her loved ones rarely gets mentioned through Dracula or Alucard. This, by the way, is a problem in both shows. Both have a lot of issues like this, and it unfortunately takes away from connecting to these characters. The plot points aren't hit because a character learns something or anything important is revealed. Looking at the whole finished show, the endpoints of each character weren't bad. The problem was more so their arc and how they got there. The plot points of each character arc feel rushed, and the show is too busy at sounding nuanced and sophisticated. That's why oftentimes when looking through positive reviews of the show, they don't really mention the connection they felt to the characters or the emotional ride the viewers are taken on, but a more objective statement on how realistic the characters and messages are. Obviously, emotional investment can be subjective, but shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender, for example, clearly took the time to establish character motivations and actually go through with them, taking time to hit important points in the arc. That show is constantly praised for emotional connection from the viewers, and it's easy to see why. 2. The importance of themes. I think another main issue with the series is that there is no overall message across the series and its characters. Take Attack on Titan, for example. Its main theme is the inherent human desire for freedom and rejecting to be a slave to your perceived fate. From the very beginning, with the bird in Eren's eye reflection, to the end with him exposed as a slave to his predestined fate, this message stayed consistent throughout multiple seasons. It is conveyed through the cycle of war, friendship, and opposing worldviews. But describing the theme in one word, it would be freedom. Another great example is Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. The main concept of the show is equivalent exchange, which says in order to gain something of value, something of the same value must be lost, therefore making a sacrifice. This defined all aspects of the story, from its magic system to the world building to the lessons the brother learned in the end. They learned that true sacrifice has no value attached to it, because nothing is expected in return, since it can't be quantified or exchanged. The brothers learned this in aspects of love and human life. Nothing can equal it. I consider both of these stories extremely well written, because while being very complex in presenting different issues, every decision the writer make goes back to their main concepts and themes, making the storytelling cohesive through and through. So, the question forms, what is the theme of Netflix original Castlevania and Nocturne? And I mean one word or term. For the original show, I don't have much honestly. You could break it down to the seasons, with season 1 being about grief and revenge, as we see with Dracula's loss and descent into madness. Season 2 is about justice and morality, with characters like Hector, Isaac, Carmilla, and Alucard examining their connection to Dracula and his actions. Season 3 is about power and loneliness, as we see with Carmilla's desire for control and Alucard being alone. And Season 4 is about closure and redemption. Nocturne at first seemed to hint at a more cohesive thematic journey, with revolution being a theme put in the forefront. But as the story went on, and especially in Season 2, this aspect, while still present due to the period setting, gets lost. One constant in both shows was the influence of the Catholic Church and its corruption. But that in itself wasn't the overall point of the story. It served more as a plot device to explore themes of morality. The problem with both series starts with a lack of a cohesive thematic spine throughout the show. This makes the experience feel hollow because there's no real message at the end of it all. Ideally, the theme should connect all the different pieces of a show, from the character arcs to the plot progression, the magic, and the message. I believe that this missing starting point is the reason why a lot of the writing issues became so apparent. Every character should contribute to sending a cohesive message. The plot then becomes tighter, making the show roll off effortlessly. Like Attack on Titan once again. Every single character, no matter the screen time, contributed in some way to the overall plot. Now, while the original Castlevania Nocturne lacked in decent pacing, reasonable causality, and a cohesive theme, the first 2 seasons of Series 1 did have clear goals and structures for the plot. The same can't be said for its latter 2 seasons. Castlevania after Season 2. As Netflix does, the commercial success of a first season is the biggest indicator for a follow-up. The first season was literally a test run to see if people would like the direction. While game fans were hyped for the series at first, the story after Season 2 left some unsatisfied. The goal of defeating Dracula, the most famous plot point in the games, and set up in the show from the very beginning, was achieved at the end of Season 2. In an animated series, once Dracula dies and maybe after one resurrection, the joke becomes stale. The storyline has to be planned out very carefully because you get one Dracula death. After he dies in Season 2, both latter seasons have the main characters be separated from each other, and furthermore, their respective arcs didn't merge in any meaningful way. Looking at Season 3 and 4, the plot wasn't greatly influenced by Dracula's death, which was supposed to be a major event. Not only was he set up to be the big bad, name recognition and game legacy alone makes him the most important character. After his demise, some characters were influenced by his legacy, like Ziffa and Trevor for example, but Dracula as a villain is mostly forgotten. Speaking of our main couple, Trevor and Ziffa. The storyline of the Resurrection was the only one dealing with Dracula's death more directly. Ziffa and Trevor in both seasons are separated from the rest, and their main storyline becomes traveling around, fighting demons and stopping possible resurrections. But I'm not sure what we were supposed to take away from their journeys. In Season 3 they discover a cult's dark secret, and it of course ends in a climactic final battle. But what exactly was the point of the storyline? Why did the couple need to be betrayed and lied to? What do they learn from it? We see Ziffa visibly disturbed in the end. But how does that inform the series' overall narrative, or her own character arc? She wasn't set up as a naive character who trusted too fast. You'd think that would be the case since Trevor tells her in the end that this time he'll pick the route to take. She doesn't really grow throughout the narrative. She knows who she is at the start of the story and doesn't need to change. And while Trevor grows from a careless and selfish disgrace to a more sensible and serious hero, his arc after Season 2 falls flat. While he learns to be more open to love, even confessing to Ziffa before the final battle, he doesn't evolve much. Their story seemed like a side plot to the main narrative, even though Trevor is supposed to be the most important character for this series. Alucard. Alucard is introduced as a gallant and charming foil to Trevor's careless personality. We don't get a lot of moments of his past, only through some of his exposition or his childhood bedroom. After killing his father, Alucard chooses to stay in the castle and eventually becomes very lonely. 2 Japanese sword fighters seek him out to help them fight night creatures, and in his loneliness he quickly takes them in. This informs us that he may be naive to some capacity, but that was never set up. After the betrayal, we saw the first hints of him slowly but surely growing bitter and distrusting, just like his father. But that didn't get any time to really foster. So much so that this plot point is quickly forgotten in Season 4, and the moment a new opportunity to help a human arrives, Alucard is more than ready to help. You could argue that with this he learns to trust humans again, but we never really saw him distrusting them. A possible explanation could be that Alucard refuses to go down Dracula's path, but the conscious refusal to turn to darkness isn't really explored. Alucard is lonely, gets betrayed, is bitter for a bit, and then all is forgotten once people are attacked by monsters. Why rush it like this? Well, I assume it's because he needed to join Trevor and Ziffa in the end, as quickly as possible. His storyline isn't connected to the two in any way up until he joins them. The writers needed the trio to be back together, but didn't set up Alucard's arc for that. He wasn't even distrusting Trevor and Ziffa, 2 humans, which I thought would be the obvious progression to make the reunion more impactful. He joined them without any hesitation or conflict. Again, this takes away any meaning from his journey. Isaac. Isaac's whole character is defined by hatred for humans. After being enslaved as a child, he develops a strong dislike for human life and has sworn to serve Dracula, ironically making himself a servant again. That's a great setup. After being banned by Dracula, who wanted to protect him from human attacks, he wanders around the world building up his army in Season 3, and in Season 4 eventually arrives at Carmilla's castle. His character arc concludes in defeating her and choosing a peaceful life, sparing Hector. While many consider him to be nuanced and complex, I can't help but think that his storyline was pointless as well. On paper, his arc was him realizing that nobody, not humans, night creatures, or vampires, are inherently evil, and can be more what people think of them. This was illustrated in multiple conversations with different people or night creatures. When he finally gets to Hector, who still thinks that Isaac wants revenge, he chooses to spare him after recognizing them having been used as tools and that they do have free will and agency. On paper, this conclusion totally fits into both of their arcs. The revenge on Hector becomes a vital motivation for Isaac, but we don't see them interact with each other at all. Them coming together at the end wasn't because they could put their ideological differences aside and grow from it, but because Isaac started to realize that humanity is not all bad, and Hector was simply a victim of it. We never really saw them clash and come back together, having their ideologies tested. Isaac sacrificed countless innocent lives to increase his army, and even after coming to terms with the Grey in the world, we never really see him truly reflect on his actions. We have to accept that he was, or maybe still is, the bad guy, who had some pseudo-philosophical conversation that sounded intellectual, and then he became a bit less cynical. Nothing was learned because, the Middle Ages were harsh and we aren't even supposed to admire him, even though he literally defeated the main villain of the show. His final fight with Carmilla didn't carry any weight since most of the work was done by his night creatures. You could say this was set up with him building his army, but what exactly did he learn? Yes, his army was supporting his invasion in a logistical sense, but why is it important for his character progression? There wasn't any established backstory where Isaac had to fight alone and didn't ever have allies. He doesn't learn anything about vampires or Carmilla herself to help him in the fight. She just needed to go down and hey, Isaac has an army. This is what I meant with the series coming off as realistic, in that he needs an army for an invasion, but this should ideally inform his character progression as well. A compelling character needs more than philosophical conversations or newfound nuanced thinking. We needed to see him be confronted with the truth, with different opinions and worldviews, kind of like Gabby was in Attack on Titan. Him having a demon army at standby when someone dared to push back, unfortunately wasn't the way to do that. Hector. Hector in the show is quite different than in the games. He gets manipulated multiple times throughout the story and serves as a character foil to Isaac. Hector shows more empathy and values human life to some extent, while Isaac completely despises it. Hector's arc deals with finding agency. He goes from serving Dracula to serving Carmilla, and eventually becoming a pet for the sisters. At the end of Season 3, after a lot of manipulation and diplomacy from Lenore, she tricks him into swearing loyalty to her and her sisters, officially making him a slave. But when the 4th season begins, he appears more relaxed and calculated. His development from the helpless tool to the more stoic Forge Masters happens off screen. We don't really get to see how he adapts to his new life. Starting at Season 4, he already plans his sister's downfall, placing these stones carefully into the wall. These are then activated when Isaac arrives at the castle to build a tunnel for him to get to Carmilla uninterrupted. Again, the problem isn't where Hector ends up, but more so how he gets there. An important step of his arc, that being him adapting to basically slavery and clearing up his mind, happens off screen. Carmilla and her sisters. While there was a clear direction for Carmilla to go to, ironically becoming the thing that she was berating Dracula and her former lover for, her descent into madness wasn't developed ideally. I didn't really understand where the switch happened, what caused her to become the Mad Queen. I liked the idea of her arc but not the execution. Striga and Morana didn't have anything to do during the runtime, and their ending reflected that. Lenore was an interesting character and balanced Carmilla out nicely, but with her as well, it seems like if it wasn't for Isaac storming the castle, she would have been just fine keeping Hector as a pet. Nothing was challenged and therefore nothing was learned. She doesn't see any way out for her, apologizes for the torture, and steps into sunlight. Cool. Castlevania Nocturne. Castlevania Nocturne adapts the game Rondo of Blood and possibly Symphony of the Night for Season 3. The story centers on Richter Belmont, a vampire hunter and descendant of Trevor, who lives in 18th century France at the time of the Revolution. Together with his friends, he needs to stop a new vampire messiah, Elizabeth Bathory, from plunging the world into darkness with a solar eclipse. The solar eclipse obviously being a reference to Julius Belmont's story. I won't go into detail about the characters since there are only 16 episodes at this point in time, with lots of characters. But I'll just preface this by saying that character-wise, it displays similar problems to Series 1. Season 1. Young Richter and his mother are planning for Richter to flee from the US to France. Before Richter can safely get on the ship, a vampire named Olorox attacks his mother, and is aided in killing her by Richter distracting the fight. He spares Richter and promises to kill him at a later date. In France, a teenage Richter now lives with Maria Renard and their mother Tara as an adoptive son. Maria, a revolutionist, is fighting demons alongside him. One day the two encounter two vampire fighters from Haiti, Annette and Edouard. They tell him about an upcoming arrival of a new vampire messiah, Elizabeth Bathory. Her most loyal servant, Drolta, is an Egyptian vampire whose goal it is for Bathory to embody the ancient Egyptian goddess Sekhmet. The priest of the town and a knight called Mizrak help the demon queen and forge night creatures for her to fight the revolution. The priest is revealed to be Maria's father and her mother is transformed into a vampire. The season ends with a big fight between the hunters and Drolta, until an awakened Alucard kills her in a surprise. In Season 2, Drolta is resurrected as a demon and her backstory is expanded upon. Richter, Alucard and Annette fight night creatures, while Annette connects to her ancestral magic, becoming the body for a furious Sekhmet to use against Drolta. In contact with her now vampiric mother, Maria unleashes a corrupt side of her magic, with Just, Richter's grandfather, guiding her. In her distress, she ends up killing her father. Mizrak, wounded from battle, is turned into a vampire by Olorox. Annette, Alucard and Richter can defeat Drolta and Bathory with the help of Sekhmet. In the end, Annette and Richter leave to fight in the Haitian Revolution, while Alucard stays with Maria and Just in France. We get foreshadows to Dark Priest Shaft who looms over Terra, possibly adapting Symphony of the Night. As already mentioned, Nocturne suffers from very similar problems as Series 1, exhibiting pacing and thematic issues. While the theme seems to initially be very solid, given the time period of the French Revolution, this second adaptation took a whole lot of liberties for its story. Since Dracula is dead, the writers had to come up with some conflict and chose the French Revolution. But even with this, the revolution itself functions more as a backdrop to the real conflict with the vampire messiah. Bathory isn't linked in any way to the revolution, nor is she established as a symbol of inequality or power. The only connection is that she comes to France because the aristocracy has been infiltrated by vampires and the priest is willing to help her. They didn't even do the obvious of having vampires be a metaphor for the rich, feeding off of lower class citizens to keep their wealth. They may have implied it, but there was no class conflict as you'd assume with the French Revolution. So I'm left confused as to why this was such a big point for the writers to make. I generally thought that they'd have the famous royal castle as Castlevania, which yes is far from the source material, but hey, if you're gonna make the revolution part of your story, to the point that you bring in another revolution from Haiti, I don't see how that could have been a problem, since it's so different from the game anyway. And I get it, having Dracula return as a bad guy for every adaptation is boring. While there were technical issues, I got to admit that the ending was concluded in a mostly satisfying way, to where the main character arcs came together in a final clash. From Annette's ancestral magic, to Richter's magical powers, to Drolta's philosophy. I'm not saying it's flawless, but for how this show handled the first season, This progression genuinely seemed thought out. There apparently will be a third season since not every arc was finished, with Symphony of the Night being the most likely game to adapt. Representation, lore changes, and optics. Lore changes. A big discussion point about Castlevania is the topic of lore, loyalty, and representation, which is influenced by race swapping or changing characters' personalities and arcs. Changes from the source material will always be a part of adaptations, but they don't have to be bad ones. Many praise the change of Isaac, for example, as his Netflix counterpart comes off as more nuanced and complex. In a show like this, the concept of constant resurrection becomes stale fast. Constantly having Belmonts defeat Dracula makes his death less impactful. That's why this kind of plot needs to be planned out carefully. The first 2 seasons of the 2017 series progresses like one video game issue, with the main goal being for a Belmont to defeat Dracula. It tells a story in a darker, more mature tone with political intrigue. The religious aspect is expanded upon and the characters fleshed out. The show presents a more original story after season 2. A majority of the critiques are reserved for the latter seasons, because the plot loses its focus. The game's simplicity will never go out of style for most people, and especially older fans. With Nocturne, the plot is completely reimagined, which of course sparked backlash. But these people don't understand that writing the same story will eventually bore them. So I guess the question is, who do the writers please in a situation like that? Having different shows with a similar plot of defeating Dracula may seem uninteresting to new viewers, who may not care about lore loyalty, as long as they can watch an interesting story. But changing up the story completely frustrates game fans. Representation. While I talked about the character and personality changes in the review section, I want to take a look at the visual changes. Race swapping overall seems to be tricky, because if it's a beloved character, original fans would have a problem with that, and it also comes off as non-white characters taking sloppy seconds. If it's a new character, they have to most likely stay in the background, because the source material didn't have them as a main character, as we kind of saw with Annette. You're basically stuck. In the first adaptation, majority of the characters are mostly accurate to the games, although simplified for animation purposes. One big change occurred in the case of Isaac, where in the games he was portrayed as a white, ginger-haired, more flamboyant guy, who has a more expressive and sadistic nature. In the show, he's portrayed by a bald black man who comes off as more stoic and philosophical. The sadistic part is twisted to pertain to himself. While there of course was some backlash to his race swapping, it was generally received well since it used his blackness to further delve into his backstory as a slave, and him eventually freeing himself. Furthermore, his character arc and his nuanced depiction was praised. The bigger backlash came when Nocturne was released. A first big target was the character of Annette, who in the games was a blonde or purple-haired white woman. In the Netflix version, she's replaced by a dark-skinned black girl from Haiti with shoulder-length locks. It was the same 2 sides again, as always. One complaining about simply changing the character, apparently fitting into the trend of changing white characters into other races, while others praised the change due to connecting Annette's Haitian roots to the story's themes of revolution, therefore making her a more well-rounded character. The character of Edouard was an original addition and appears to be of mixed race, with lighter skin, a looser hair texture and blue eyes. Since he wasn't based on anyone in the games, his backlash was smaller. Jolta Fuentes as well was portrayed by an Egyptian black woman, instead of an old white witch. She was especially praised for her character design. One more race change happened with Olrox, who is shown as an Aztec vampire instead of the pale monster-like one in the games. His change wasn't as discussed as much as Annette as well. These reactions don't surprise me in the slightest. With the difference in response, it's clear that people who complain about white characters being turned into a different race simply pick and choose when to be outraged by it. While Annette in the games was more of a plot device, you'd think the race change of hers wouldn't really matter since it doesn't really change the story, right? But no, she actually got the biggest backlash. Some may explain it by her being unlikable in the show, But the outcry started with her poster alone. Jolta, who was the villain, didn't see the amount of backlash as Annette. It's therefore pretty obvious that a young, beautiful, innocent white love interest, like gay Annette, shouldn't be turned into a black girl. These people didn't have any problem with Jolta, an older white witch, being turned into an evil vampire villain. Same with Old Rocks. All they care about is the image and what female whiteness represents. It's about representation and optics. I do not for a second believe that even if Annette was likable, that the backlash would have been smaller. I mean, hey, at least she was a slave, right? So about optics. I really do also have to mention the optics of these race-related factors, starting off with Isaac. While his change to a black man was praised, I couldn't help but think of the horrible optics of a black slave boy freeing himself from his master, but then continuing on his master's philosophy by torturing himself now and liking the pain. This in combination with his undying loyalty to Dracula, a white vampire master, didn't really help his case with the desire for freedom. He fled one master only to find the next. At the end, when he recognized his previous role as a tool, he never really seems to recognize his loyalty to Dracula as a flaw, which in my eyes reads as him not really learning the lesson he needed to, that he can be his own master. For Nocturne, Annette got praised for the opportunity to finally represent a different culture in this otherwise very white property. She's the main love interest, she learns to face her fears, connects to her ancestors, and is allowed to feel grief and anger. And having black writers for this aspect of the story is refreshing and should obviously be the norm. With a critical amount of dark-skinned black female characters being subjected to staying the strong black woman, the best friend's sidekick, being over-sexualized instead of valued, being overweight and painted as aggressive or sassy, her vulnerability comes as a positive change. And while Annette is definitely a step in the right direction, her character still exhibited some negative stereotypes associated with black girls. Now you may ask yourself, what isn't considered bad optics for black girls? Is every character flaw now a bad look? Isn't it also subjective? And to that my answer is that historically certain roles and depictions have definitely been reserved for certain racial groups, with Middle Eastern, South Asian, and indigenous women being depicted as submissive and sexually available.
One of the most egregious things about this film, which is the over-sexualization of Jasmine and the fact that she is the only Disney princess who is over-sexualized like this, to the point where she literally changes into a sinful, all-red, sexy outfit at 16. It falls back into the brown women are objects. And it is part of the reason there is so much brown fever abuse that you get from men as a brown woman in this country. That is the representation that they see.
East Asian women as nerdy or the exotic dragon lady, Latin women as feisty or overly emotional, and black women as strong, sassy, or over-sexualized. White women have enjoyed the most diverse representation, with the majority being traditionally feminine or the girl boss trope. Ideally, every single group should have diverse representation, leaving stereotypes behind. So what would you think would be a complete departure and refreshing optics for black girls? I'd argue that a more poised, feminine, vulnerable, and bubbly character would be a complete overhaul from what we see otherwise.
Why couldn't Tiana be a stupid girl in a dress?
Yes! I'm so angry that every other princess is like, you get your princess story and your big happy ending. Congrats, Tiana. You can work harder now.
I think it would have been a much more interesting story if Tiana was live. If she was just some airhead little girl who came from money and she was just like, I don't like to work for anything. Like, there were so many different options they could have gone with.
Annette in the beginning is tough, strong, snarky, and serious. This is even apparent in her clothing. While fellow white characters like Zypha, Carmilla, or Maria are allowed to dress more traditionally feminine and still be strong, Annette's design comes off as more masculine and practical, her powers being linked to her literal strength, with her using metals and swords, while Maria draws circles in the air and lets her animals fight for her, Sypha being a magician, and Carmilla rarely ever fighting until her end. It's these things that culminate and unfortunately stereotype Annette. Black girls rarely get to exhibit a traditionally feminine, desired, and protected love interest, all at once that is. And since white or sometimes even other races of women can, so could have Annette. I'd argue that Mel from Arcane came close to defying all stereotypes, but yeah, season 2 happened. However, Annette after all was the love interest, and the ending finally showed her being vulnerable and sitting back, letting Richter protect her. Her clothing became girlier and her demeanor softer. But it's still crazy to me that 2 black heroes are former slaves, when there is so much more to black people, even way back in the Middle Ages or the Enlightenment era. As for Jolta, she seemed a bit more dynamic and fun, and was even revealed to have manipulated her messiah Bathory. But she was quite sexualized in her design and had to fight a man at the end. Yes, she's a demon, but optics-wise this paints her as being a strong black woman. Again, not the worst, but also not free of stereotypes. So, after all of this reviewing, could there be an alternate Castlevania series? Well, this is my attempt. The Lost Potential. Before I lay out my version, I will preface this with certain goals that will play into the narrative, and would definitely be incorporated if it were to fully be adapted like this. And while hindsight is everything and somewhat unfair for me to use, I will incorporate some original Netflix elements that I actually liked. My story will deal with loneliness as a thematic center, but will have themes like religion and the concept of inner darkness and inner light as a backup to further explore this theme. The plot will be closer to the source material, conveyed as an episodical show. Having episodes with a contained storyline helps explore the characters and world better. Ideally, a show has an overarching goal with self-contained episodes. Also, while there will be a long-term narrative at play, I really want the seasons to be differentiated by new characters with new arcs. I think of this as an epic, multi-POV story. A season would likely have somewhere between 12 and 15 episodes. This version will also do its title justice. A lot of the plot happens inside the castle and it will be explored through different mechanics. I've decided to not include every single Belmont and therefore will change up the birth orders to make the family tree fit into the story. This sets up the different protagonists better and the plot is more interconnected. It will feature Leon, Trevor, Just, and Richter. I know Simon and Christopher are iconic characters in the games, but for a thought-out story, their entries didn't really bring anything particularly interesting to my vision. The Belmonts will be at the center of the seasons, but in this rewrite I will give special attention to original additions, like the other cultures exploring vampirism. I think there's great opportunities to enrich the story. All will play a part in the plot. While medieval Romanian life will be shown, the more culturally diverse aspects will be explained more in detail here. Because of this, multiple blonde female characters will be race or hair swapped. I want to keep Lisa as the one iconic blonde, since in the games Dracula marries her because she reminded him of his first wife. There will be symbolism to the narrative with color coding, which the show was somewhat playing with but not enough in my opinion. I will replace the ebony stone with a sapphire one and rewrite the meaning and roles of these elements to explore the duality of red and blue. The gore and horror elements will become more gruesome as the show progresses. In the original, the initial shock in episode 1 is impressive, but the violence and horror unfortunately became stale. Lastly and very importantly, this rewrite won't provide the delivery. I won't go into how exactly the magic works or how a fight plays out in detail, because we'll be here forever. A TV series depends a lot on the storyboard, atmosphere, voice acting, music, etc. Therefore, my focus lies on the rough plot of the story and what actually happens. And I can't detail every single character journey as well, but will try to mention all the important beats. Now, let's get into it. In the very first scene, under a first quarter moon, which represents balance, Matthias and his wife Elisabetha are riding home through stormy weather. She is holding onto him tight, The season closely follows the game Lament of Innocence, with Leon and Matthias' storyline from friends to enemies, and the final twist of Matthias turning into Dracula. The appearance of the Crimson Stone had given the vampire Walter Bernhard the power to become a vampire and create demons. The stone grants immortality and the servitude from death itself. However, it carries the curse of vampirism. Walter lives in a centuries-old castle on the outskirts of Wallachia. Leon will go through the Forest of Eternal Night, and then the castle for majority of the runtime. However, I will leave out the times he goes back to Rinaldo. Rinaldo here being Romani, and his alchemy being inspired by Romani herbal knowledge. Otherwise, all the plot points will be kept in. Each episode tackles one aspect of the story. We have an episode for the Forest of Eternal Night, one for the origin of the magic whip, one for the Crimson Stone. With this setup, these important lore elements can be explored individually and be fleshed out. Generally, more episodes are devoted to establishing the role of the church, the medieval world and its politics. Especially the initial ones will explore Leon and Matthias' duality, with Matthias being a very devout Christian, almost dependent on it, which makes him feel personally attacked by God when his wife dies. Leon is seen wearing a mix of red and blue, while Matthias dons a purely blue outfit. The theme of loneliness will follow Matthias, and we see him dealing with the loss of his wife and his world darkening. This eventually develops into him wanting to bring in eternal night and horror for everyone. We repeatedly see him struggle with grief and feeling alone. It shows how loneliness can make someone go mad, since we as humans are social creatures, and without that aspect we lose our humanity. This is what Matthias will represent throughout this first season, and he won't be the last characters to experience such feelings. The church is portrayed as the light in contrast to the world's darkness. We see how it brings people together, again highlighting the theme of loneliness, gives them hope and ultimately makes humans better. It is a struggle between our inner darkness and inner light. Generally, the aesthetic of the first few seasons is kept in reds and browns, a dark but warm color palette. Through this, the first couple seasons will depict the Belmonts as legendary heroes, who become immortal legends through their actions. Red in this case symbolizing immortality. That's why at the end, Dracula is seen wearing a deep red and black combination. Turning away from Christianity, he embraces vampirism and its immortal nature. The last episode announces Matthias as Dracula and the new motivation growing in the Belmonts' hearts that will drive them. The season ends with Dracula expanding Walter's castle to build the now famous setting. Season 2 is an originally written arc. It is needed to set up further events and truly hone in on Dracula's descent into complete darkness. The season starts centuries later and sees him remarrying with Lisa and creating a family with his son Adrian. It starts out similarly to the first season of the Netflix show, but will give the viewer time to get to know the family better since their dynamic will be fleshed out. We see how Adrian reacts to being a vampire and the family facing challenges. Adrian is a protagonist next to Dracula. Dracula recruits humans who turn their back on God or were shunned by the light and makes them practice devil forgery. The castle has different levels to it, which aren't all explored right away. With Season 2, the lower part is shown through Adrian, who has become an expert in its tricks and knows the ins and outs. The castle feels almost conscious. Later seasons will show upper parts with the final on the very top. The higher this section gets, the more isolated and therefore mad or paranoid a person becomes. Castlevania could have also been a fitting title. While growing up, first little disagreements between Adrian and Dracula happen. Adrian wants to be like his father and tries to attain the Crimson Stone, which the two constantly fight over. While Adrian wants to learn the ways of Dracula's magic, his father clearly differentiates him from other full vampires, and gatekeeps magical information. He loves his family but still has hatred for humans, and his son is half human. However, with his sneaky ways and learning to work the castle to his advantage, Adrian manages to sneak in some information for him to practice his own magic. The element of isolation is big for him since he's sheltered a lot. he can't fully relate to either vampires or humans. Since he struggles with his identity, he devotes himself to reading and exploring the world. Therefore, he becomes very secretive against his parents, finding ways to sneak out. On the other end, the Belmonts have become a disgrace to the church and have lost all admiration and wealth. A younger teenage Adrian escapes the castle one evening and befriends an orphan named Trevor. Adrian connects with him through their respective loneliness, and the two become close to face adventures together, fighting night creatures and corrupt priests. They build a group with open-minded, happy human friends of Trevor, very different than what Adrian has heard all his life from his father. They treat his wounds and guide him through his struggles. Trevor then, of course, is revealed to be a Belmont. However, Adrian has made sure to not tell them that Dracula is his father. After Dracula realizes that Adrian has been leaving at night and is friends with a Belmont, he locks him up in the castle. The church sees the young Trevor developing as a skilled vampire hunter and offer him wealth and a new status if he goes along with their plan. After all, Dracula is the reason for Trevor's hard life. He figures out Lisa as Dracula's wife, since she sometimes visits the city to help people. He preys on her kindness and exposes her to the church, who crucifies her for her witchcraft. Seeing her being burned alive, Trevor is conflicted. While she married the devil, Lisa didn't do any crime or harm to anyone. When Adrian is allowed to go look for his mother, he instantly asks Trevor for help and realizes that he orchestrated her death. Trevor is shocked to find out it was his friend's mother. In a fit of rage, Adrian attacks him, but his inexperience in fighting leads to him being overpowered by Trevor. However, one of Trevor's friends secretly rescues him and tells him to flee. Adrian looks for his father and has to find out that he now wants to punish all of humanity, which the two disagree on, making them clash. He's seen a good amount of kind-hearted people in his time with Trevor, and he had Lisa as his mother. With the immense guilt of conspiring against his friend's mother, Trevor flees to the outskirts of the village. The last scene shows two forge masters practicing hard in Dracula's castle, getting better with each day. Season 3 is adapting the game Dracula's Curse. It takes the same route as the original series does when Dracula declares war on humanity. He plans to destroy the world and darken it once the next solar eclipse happens. He has mostly locked himself up on a higher floor, wanting to keep away from everyone. The War Council is introduced, including Carmilla. As time goes by, all of these vampires recognize how Dracula has gone mad, and Carmilla manipulates all of them to betray him. These council vampires are somewhat underused in the show. They're established as part of this big, important council, then get killed one by one at the end of the season. In this version, each of them gets specific tasks to do, related to stopping the team on their journey to Dracula. They will be representative of different cultures and how that will relate to the solar eclipse. The vampires will represent Aztec, Chinese, Romani, and Egyptian culture, all displaying their version of a vampire. That's why in later seasons we see different people from all over the world come to Romania to enhance their magic. Death helps the council members escape the castle safely to lure in people from their cultures to help him achieve his goal. More on that in later seasons. Trevor, now living outside of society, has to be convinced by the church to return and help them since they have no other option left. After much denying, it's when he hears of a joyful childhood friend of his, who we know from season 2, locking himself up in his house, being frightened and paranoid and all lonely, that he finds a purpose to fight again. The church had been the friend's only way of socializing. Some of Dracula's recruits have grown to be very powerful forge masters, especially Hector and Isaac. He uses them to torture humanity, and both, especially Isaac, go along with it, while Hector has a more critical view. Rather than only some scenes, they get a whole episode titled The Forge Masters, dedicated to their backstories. Isaac was a former slave, playing out just like the Netflix version, which would make more sense with his game counterpart, going from one master to the other and displaying a masochist nature. Hector's story will also stay exactly the same, exiled because of his interests and talents. This will establish them as main characters for the next season. Trevor's agreement to fight Dracula is plastered all over the city. A speaker known for being discriminated against feels hopeful seeing a Belmont be celebrated and seeks him out to help him find his granddaughter. She has set off to try and stop Dracula and is entrapped in his castle. When Trevor storms the castle, he can free her and Zypha Belnada is introduced. In my version, the speakers are an ode to the Romani people of Romania, and Zypha therefore being Romani. Now, I'm not quite sure if there was a direct inspiration for the speakers in the Netflix show, but I think having that part of Romanian culture recognized and represented would be great, and would speak to the real-life discrimination against them. It would go with their name, as oral tradition is vital in Romani culture. We see them experiencing ostracism since people believe them to be practicing witchcraft. And Zypha will have the same hair, same outfit. I will just add some culturally Romani accessories maybe, and make her skin a bit darker. Nothing too drastic. Zypha has been trying to find a sleeping soldier who would help her defeat Dracula in order to get into the people's good graces. Therefore, her arc will center around pride in her cultural identity and learning to navigate preconceived notions from other people. Instead of bickering and bantering, Trevor and Zypha connect through their respective exile by the church, which leads them to teaming up to take on Dracula's castle. Since Trevor is still cynical, they don't need to have deep conversations right away. They may just react to attacks quicker and are more aware of their surroundings. Later, the two are attacked by a huge demon, but while fighting, it leads them to destroying his spell. A human inside of the monster reveals himself as Grand and Nasty, a noble thief from Wallachia. He had been part of a rebel group against Dracula, but his whole team was killed by night creatures. When he tried to enter the castle and find Dracula to avenge his team, he was quickly turned into a demon and put in the clock tower as a guard. Through a mechanic of the castle, the team can finally find the sleeping soldier. They meet Adrian, now Alucard, who also wants to stop his father. With the execution of his mother, Alucard confronts Trevor in an emotionally charged fight. Understanding Trevor's point of view and his regret, Alucard cautiously joins the group. All of this takes up no more than 3 episodes. Episode 1 deals with the War Council, Episode 2 with the Forge Masters, and Episode 3 with the team forming. The season then mainly follows them going through the castle, fighting different monsters in a very game-like way. The castle displays more of a labyrinth-like structure and has a mind of its own. Once Dracula receives word of Leon's son Trevor planning to kill him, he sends Hector to fight. In a twist, Hector betrays Dracula and ends up in a village found by Rosalie. The War Council takes the information of the solar eclipse to their homelands and abandon Dracula in a crucial moment, leaving only a soldier to fight and defend him. Carmilla plans to overthrow Dracula and has invited her 3 beloved sisters to come and fight alongside her and overtake the castle. However, when the battle ensues, her sisters are killed by Achille, who quickly retreats to Dracula's chamber. This is devastating to Carmilla, since her relationships with her sisters we've experienced in a flashback, and it's what has fueled her all this time. Achille is pushed through the mirror, while Isaac has been sent out by Dracula to hunt for human bodies, not knowing what is happening in the castle. Dracula had suspected Hector of betraying him and wanted to protect Isaac and Achille. In an epic fight, the team fights Dracula. Alucard uses all the tricks of the castle that he has learned. He then watches Trevor whip Dracula to his death, unleashing a terrible dark energy out of the castle. Trevor then attempts to destroy the Crimson Stone, the thing that has ruined his life before it even began. However, Alucard stops him. Without the Crimson Stone, vampires can't live, and he is, after all, half vampiric. This leads to a clash between the two, even though both understand where the other is coming from. After losing his father and opposing his allies, Alucard decides to ease his pain by putting himself into a deep slumber and forget about the guilt. He leaves the Crimson Stone in an upper floor, only to be entered by his or Dracula's magic. The last scene includes a returned but heartbroken Isaac, hurt that his master is dead and determined to revenge him by killing his traitor, Hector. Season 4 adapts Curse of Darkness, the story immediately following Dracula's death. After his fall, Valekia gets poisoned with a curse by him, which is withering fields and corrupting human minds. This is a huge problem for the population, especially for Hector and his now wife Rosalie, who peacefully live on the village's outskirts and became farmers, where Hector freely uses his magic. Rosalie in this version is Aztec, but more on that later. Partly blaming himself for this, Hector feels bad for having played a part in Dracula's wrath, but he's happy to be with his wife together, wearing only blue now instead of mixing it with red. But the peace is interrupted when Rosalie dies in childbirth. Hector, grieving his dead wife, recognizes Isaac's magic on her corpse and realizes that he had orchestrated her death. He vows to revenge her and sets out to find Isaac, unaware that the curse is feeding his anger. A priest named Zed gives the now more religious Hector information about Hector's plans. The end of the first episode sees Hector standing before the castle, calling to Isaac and promising him revenge. The rest of the season plays inside of it. On the other end of the castle, Carmilla is overtaking control over all the guards, planning to kill Isaac, who wants to do the same to her for betraying Dracula. Again, in this version the castle is unimaginably big, giving them both room to live there even though they're enemies. In the games, different bosses were housed in different parts of the castle. It gives it a feeling of grandness and mystery. With Carmilla, as I asked earlier, why did she really go mad? Here, she lost her sisters, her only allies, and with that, she doesn't get the more constructive pushback as the most bloodthirsty of them. This drives her to madness and she becomes unhinged with her new power. Since she resides at an even higher floor in the castle, her paranoia and exclusivity has gotten even worse since she was already very similar with her sisters. Dracula's curse isn't helping either. Achille once again in the desert experiences flashbacks to his lonely childhood. In his anger, he refuses human help and tries to make his way alone to the castle to avenge Dracula and kill Carmilla. Throughout the season, he comes to terms with not all humans being evil. Multiple people he encounters actually want to help him just for the sake of it, out of empathy, something he hasn't seen in many vampires. He builds alliances and also starts forging his own devil army to better attack the castle. On his way up to Isaac, Hector gets saved by a magician, Zhu Li, from a monster attack, now a Chinese woman who offers him shelter and counsel. She senses the darkness growing inside of him and warns that revenge will only strengthen his evil side. However, she keeps her plans to herself. Hector also encounters Trevor Belmont, who challenges him, but after Hector holds his own and reveals his hatred for Dracula's servants, the two come to a mutual understanding. Trevor and Zypha return to the castle to get to the vampire lord and lift the curse. They are now parents to a young Just Belmont, having trouble keeping their son healthy in a cursed environment. Trevor offers himself as an ally to Hector. He even offers his understanding to his loneliness without his wife. Here Trevor shows empathy, finally letting go of the immediate distrust against people. Zypha has been training young Just to manage his magical powers, the first Belmont to possess them. This fits right in with the games, where Just was the first one to use them, even though he isn't Zypha's son. While the young boy would rather spend time with his friend Maxim, he's learning the importance of his family's lineage. However, Rosalie has transformed into a Cia Teteo, an Aztec vampire spirit. Since she died in childbirth, she specifically haunts children, most notably Just. Throughout the season, he has to deal with her attacks and his parents have to keep stepping in. Isaac is revealed to have been in contact with Zed about Achilles' whereabouts. This is a first hint about Zed playing both sides. Having the same disdain for Carmilla and Hector, Isaac has carefully placed glowing stones that he got from Saint Germain into the walls, in order to help Achille get to her as revenge. The character of Saint Germain, just like Zed, gives both Isaac and Hector information about the other main players. He is, however, an enemy of Zed. Just like in the games, I really want to keep Saint Germain somewhat mysterious and morally grey. His loneliness is shown through his commitment to time travel, and his red outfit symbolizes his fascination with eternity. The final plays out just like in the games, with Trevor, Isaac, and Hector. Here, however, Jus tries to help his father fight Isaac, but is overpowered. When Zypha tries to save him, she also gets attacked and Trevor sacrifices himself for them. Isaac stabs him and leaves him to die. Just and Zypha have to escape before getting caught up in the fight. When Hector finally makes his way to Isaac, their final duel ends with Isaac mortally wounded. But in his dying act, he completes a dark ritual meant to retrieve his lord. It was then that Zed revealed his true identity, Death, the eternal servant of Dracula, who had manipulated both Forge Masters to bring about his master's resurrection, intending for Hector's hatred to open the way. Death is still thriving since the Crimson Stone hasn't been combated yet. Hector resists the curse and faces off Death in battle. After defeating it, Dracula's resurrection fails. Achille, finally arriving at the castle with his army, sends demons one by one to attack Carmilla, since he still refuses to fight her. After realizing that Carmilla simply is too strong, he makes the hard decision to attack her. Achille manages to defeat Carmilla with his forging sword, driving the Mad Queen to suicide. I would adapt the last fighting scene the same way as in the show, just without the constant help. Cinematically, it was absolutely stunning, from the bloody stairs to the animation to the score. In this scene, the red and blue colors clash and represent a midpoint in the story. We also see this with the continuous purple aesthetic in the season. Many days later, the curse that had poisoned Wallachia begins to fade, and Hector renounces his powers once more, and withdraws to the village's forest. Just like in the beginning, he lives alone again, embracing his loneliness while wishing for community, since the villagers are afraid of his practices. Everyone except Julie, who begs him to teach her his magic and explain the castle to her. The last shot includes her looking at the castle fiercely through her window. At this point in the story, Death becomes more apparent as an antagonist, playing humans to his will and exploring their darkest side, but still keeping himself mysterious. Season 5 adapts Harmony of Dissonance with Just Belmont. Julie is seen reaching a new level in the castle, finally encountering Dracula's transportation mirror. In rural China, a solar eclipse is about to take place. A Taoist priest who is tasked with guarding the balance of life and death gets tormented for dark magic practices. When the day for his death is decided, he plans to cheat death to live an eternal life, just like vampires. He gets transformed into a great Jiangshi lord by the Chinese vampire of the War Council after agreeing to a deal. He devours people to block reincarnation, trying to plunge the world into eternal darkness where nothing is reborn. This directly takes inspiration from Chinese folklore and their version of vampires, the Jiangshi. Death sees this and, unbeknownst to Julie, helps her activate the mirror. The end of the first episode ends with the reveal that the sorcerer was Julie's husband. After she lets him enter the castle through the mirror, she can't recognize him and gets locked up by him since part of him still loves her and wants her alive. Meanwhile, a teenage Juice is chosen to receive the legendary Belmont Whip. His best friend Maxim leaves on a training expedition for several years to cope with his self-doubt, not feeling like he can measure up to his friend. Juice travels through Romania and encounters different Romani speakers. He meets magicians who show him palm and crystal ball readings and natural medicine. He starts to feel the connection to his mother's ancestry and learns how to use the powers he had been ignoring. His friend Lidi, however, who's a devout Christian, is conflicted with this, still associating Speaker's magic with evil witchcraft. Since she loves Juice, she's trying to adapt to him embracing his mother's culture. In the games, Juice is known as the most reserved and introverted Belmont, and I want to take this to add to the color symbolism. With wearing his iconic red outfit, Just wants to fit into his family's lineage, especially since he lost his father so young. With all of them glorifying heroism and immortality, aka wearing red outfits, he wants to follow suit but naturally has his mother's personality, given that she's humbler and sees herself as a part of a bigger culture, not some heroic martyr, with her also wearing blue instead of red. Blue in this case represents mortality and a simpler life. Years later, an adult Maxim returns to Just, telling him that Lydie has been kidnapped. But Maxim doesn't seem to be the same as before. He can't remember the year since he left, and everything in the castle seems distorted. In a big reveal, Just learns that Maxim had tried to piece together Dracula's forbidden remains to prove himself, but had accidentally opened the way for the Jiangshi to come and rule over the castle. Once the vampire kept the long night going and made Dracula's remains powerful enough, Maxim developed a second personality, an evil version of him. Just like his mind, the castle had also split into two versions, two sides of one. When making his way to the next level of the castle where the Jiangshi is staying, Just encounters the evil Maxim. While he repeatedly gets attacked by him, Just also wants to heal him in order to keep his friend inside of him alive and hopefully rescue him. When Maxim sees Just wearing their bracelets, symbolizing their friendship, he tries to fight off the dark influence. It's then when Dracula's remains separate from Maxim to merge with the Jiangshi. In this new room, Death has been allowing the vampire to keep the long night going, causing extreme imbalance in the world. This has led to the distortion inside Maxim and the castle. After fighting off the Jiangshi with big trouble managing the distortion, Just and Maxim fight Dracula's evil spirit to free Julie, who calls upon goddess Zihe. She needs to drive the sun turret across the sky and needs to succeed in order to not lose the sun in eternal darkness. Just uses his new divination powers to manipulate fate through reading the goddess' palm, and gives her the magic to draw the right turret. Julie's husband gets sacrificed to balance out the world, even if it's just a ray of light. Just's red jacket gets destroyed, symbolizing him embracing his true nature, humble and community-driven. He can free Lydie, who lets go of her prejudices after seeing him save the world with speaker magic. The last scene reveals Death realizing the Crimson Stone's hidden power. It can control the moon. He now knows how to properly resurrect Dracula through an endless solar eclipse. This season explores themes of harmony and imbalance, giving meaning to harmony of dissonance. The imbalance gets increasingly worse, and the struggle for balance between light and darkness gets harder each time. Season 6 adapts Rondo of Blood with Richter Belmont. Death appoints Egyptian vampire Drolta to help him find the one to resurrect Dracula, while Aztec vampire Olrox is ordered to control the sun by weakening it. Both of them have been created by War Council members. To prepare for Dracula's arrival, Death decides to find him a new potential wife, and kidnaps multiple young women from around the world. One happens to be Annette, a young Romani woman from a nearby village. As with Zypha, I will keep her original design, since I'm actually obsessed with her first iteration. The blonde version just looks so bland to me since there are infinite blondes in the games, to the point of absurdity. I will just make slight changes to celebrate her culture. Her fiancé is Richter Belmont, son of Just. Close to his parents, he lives a rather simpler life in the village and was preparing to marry Annette. His bold blue outfit symbolically means something now. The young vampire hunter promises to rescue his fiancée and storms the castle. On one floor, he finds Maria Renard, who was also kidnapped but decides to help him rescue the villagers. In the castle, multiple other girls are trapped in different parts. Here we can explore the castle some more and see different mechanics of it, for example, illusions to keep the prisoners scared and lonely. Next to Annette's chamber, another girl called Zuva is imprisoned. She's from sub-Saharan African descent and able to yield magic. Zuva is particularly scared and fears for her life, and her crying is overheard by Annette, who's separated from her by iron bars. Annette has lost her little sister to a night creature and wants to comfort her. After reading Zuva's palm, her magic is manifested and the iron bars melt. Zuva is surprised about her powers since her mother had forbidden her to use them because her father had gotten imprisoned from practicing them. Annette proposes a way out of the chamber through Zuva's abilities, and the girls manage to escape the room. They then try to rescue other captives and have to escape from guards. Meanwhile, Richter and Maria are wandering through the castle fighting monsters. In the most golden room of all, Jolta welcomes Elizabeth Bathory and declares her as the vampire messiah who will resurrect Dracula. She will try the blood of the girls to better select a wife for the vampire lord. This will take inspiration from the historical Elizabeth Bathory, who tortured young women and kids. Death has planned for her to finally do it by using the imbalance created last season to have the solar eclipse stay forever to bring Dracula back. The town's priest, meanwhile, is working with Jolta to create night creatures, which conflicts with Mizrak's ideals. He is a devout Christian, but feels increasingly alone in his beliefs, since the priest gets corrupted. When it's time for a child sacrifice to better fuel the forging of night creatures, Jolta exposes the priest as Maria's father. She must have his evil blood to be the right one. She successfully separates her from Richter to go through with the ritual, but her mother Tara steps in to stop it. She, however, gets captured by Bathory, who had been looking for her since she captured her sister in Russia. Maria's sacrifice had only been to lure in Tara since she has pure Speaker's blood. Throughout the season, Zuva feels a spiritual connection to her ancestors. An episode shows her as a teenager and her family traveling to Egypt, trying to gain knowledge of ancient Yorubian magic. But Jolta had captured her father, who sacrificed himself for her and her mother, since the vampire actually wanted to capture his daughter. In the castle, Richter and Maria help out a young man fighting demons. He's revealed to be Edouard, Zuva's promised husband, who tries to find and rescue her. Edouard is from a noble French family and of Yorubian and French descent. The three form an alliance to defeat Elizabeth and stop Dracula's resurrection. While Annette and Zuva make their way to their loved ones, Annette takes multiple hits to protect her new sister, since she couldn't do it last time. But after being so wounded, she sacrifices her soul through a ritual, from which a sapphire stone is created, made out of love and selflessness. Her soulless body is left to be slaughtered. This gem, however, kills the guards and saves Zuva, who can escape the upper floor through spiritual magic. Edouard, meanwhile, gets captured by hungry vampires and is turned into a night creature by the priest. When Richter finally finds Zuva, both make the bone-chilling discovery that their partners are gone. During another demon attack, Edouard kills another night creature to rescue his fiancée. Because of this, the priest locks him up to analyze why he can act upon his free will. Hurt by Annette's death, Richter tries to destroy the sapphire gem, angry that this took his fiancée from him. But he recognizes how it has kept the terrified Zuva alive, and made Annette finally compensate for her sister's death. Since Annette and Zuva couldn't get to all the prisoners, 6 remaining girls have been hidden away. Having drank Speaker's blood from Tara, Bathory can finally begin to bring on the eclipse to resurrect Dracula. To complete his rebirth, they perform a rondo of blood, a ritual that sacrifices maidens whose blood flow in a repeating cycle around Dracula's remains. Richter tries to break the ritual by mixing in his own blood, the one of Dracula's biggest enemy, but the sacrifice is in full force. In a final fight against Bathory and Jolta, the team has to stop the resurrection. With their plan, Maria has to deliver the final blow to the Messiah, but stops when she realizes that her mother has been turned into a vampire. Disturbed, she leaves the fight and flees to another part of the castle. In a final blow, Zuva and Richter get separated into different parts of the floor. Richter's grief manifests in a dark spirit lurking over him. Dracula is successfully brought back, turning the world completely dark. Olrox, however, is being devoured and killed by Tsuateteo spirits, who punish him for hindering their cycle to accompany the sun throughout the day. Dracula's shout into the world, however, wakes up a sleeping Alucard. Season 7, the last season, adapts Symphony of the Night, arguably the most popular and loved game. The season opens up with Alucard's awakening. He begins to remember the night he fell asleep and looks out the window. It's an eternal night and the sun hasn't risen. Carefully he makes it out of his chamber to see what has happened. Seeing Dracula's highest room, where only he can enter, be illuminated in red light, he realizes that his father has been resurrected. This eternal night will tie into the game's title, Symphony of the Night, since most of its story will be told during nighttime. On his way to find him, he encounters a disturbed Maria who has lost her mother and takes her under his wing. On another end of the castle, Zuva hears Richter in anguish and can sense something dark looming over him. Through melting the iron bars between them, she can get to him. Richter has gone mad to the point of trying to attack her, but he can't bring himself to do it. His arc will deal with grief hindering his magic and fighting powers. In general, him and Zuva support each other through grief and provide each other company. Eventually, at the mid-season point, they both begin to very slowly form a romantic connection. Nothing too dramatic, just cute interaction since both just lost their partners. Jolta now wants for Bathory to embody the Egyptian goddess of the sun, Sekhmet, known for a vampiric bloodthirst. With this, she hopes to gain control over the sun and not only cover it with the moon, but destroy it forever, having no human life on Earth. A very radical decision since vampires need human blood to survive. The priest meanwhile can't figure out Edward's free will and punishes him by laying a curse on him to follow his orders. As the season goes on, Jolta's worship of Bathory is explained through flashbacks, depicting Jolta's background just like in the show. Her exploring Sekhmet's duality as the goddess of healing, but also war. She sought out Bathory since she was evil enough to handle her drinking her blood, and hopefully embody her. Alucard and Maria work their way up to Dracula and fight demons, but Terra, now unwillingly working for Bathory, lures in Maria toward her and tries to corrupt her in order to sacrifice her. However, she's internally conflicted since part of her also still wants to protect her daughter. With Terra beside her, Maria separates from Alucard and her magic gets corrupted, letting out evil beasts just like in the show. Alucard tries to soften her but without luck. Mizrak has seen Maria be corrupted and is also tired of the priest's hypocrisy. He finally makes the decision to bring him near Maria, whose anger leads her to killing her own father. This alarms Bathory and Jolta, who now have no Forge Master. In trying to protect her, Terra tries to separate from Maria, but once Jolta finds her, she kills Terra for betraying her. Maria, all alone, is found by Alucard, and he promises to not leave her lonely, and that he will be there for her. Throughout the rest of their journey, Maria's powers slowly turn back to their holy state. They gain both human and vampire allies, showing Alucard that he can embrace both of his sides. Zuva and Richter also try to find Dracula's throne room, but she keeps getting distracted by mysterious spirits who call out to her. When she's attacked, Richter gets injured and the demonic Edward saves her one last time, giving her his last piece of his Yorubian possessions, a love bracelet which transports her to the spiritual realm. He had held on to this since him living in France distanced him from his other cultural half. He had known that it possessed magical powers, which is why he has free will, even as a night creature. It reminded him of Zuva, but since he has no future with her anymore, he gives it to her. He gets attacked but dies happy knowing she's safe. The spiritual realm plays out similar to the show. Zuva reconnects with her maternal ancestors, but this time encounters both Ogun, god of iron, and Oshun, goddess of femininity and water. Ogun confronts her with her fears of fighting, and tells her that she's the ones who melt iron, while Oshun assures her that she has all she needs. Femininity is not a weakness, and overcoming fear doesn't mean that she has to become hard like iron. She just needs to trust herself, and for that, she needs the whole truth. The goddess then creates a river, leading to a pyramid with a crying Sekhmet inside, just like in the anime. There she reveals to Zuva that her father was of Egyptian ancestry. He was hiding it to not let Jolta find her, since Zuva is the one to embody Sekhmet. The goddess recognizes her own duality of war and healing, and blesses Zuva's sapphire stone with healing powers, hopefully bringing in a new era of mortality, showing itself in true human life. Annette could sense the light inside Zuva, and her sacrifice was manifested in the gem, representing life, mortality, and the sun. The stone is put in a magical sword, but it has another hole with the shape of another stone. Zuva finds the courage to let the goddess possess her, and is let out of the spirit world. In the Nocturne series, Richter as a protagonist takes a back seat, and Annette takes up the screen time. This is the problem I was talking about earlier. You finally have a black character with depth, but the main character is overshadowed. In this version, however, there are more episodes centered on Richter, and having one contain Zuva's journey wouldn't be as glaring. When Jolta realizes what happened, she angrily attacks Bathory, who couldn't manage to fully consume Sekhmet's blood. Throughout her journey, she had forgotten Sekhmet's duality and only focused on war. The two vampires clash and kill each other in battle. Seeing Zuva's light, Richter can finally fight off Dark Priest Shaft with his magic powers. He takes her with him to face off Dracula, and his mission is now to protect the sun with the weapon she gave him. Richter has 10 more minutes before the moon will stay there forever. When Alucard makes it to his father's room, Dracula tries to push his son into choosing a side, humans or vampires. He gives Alucard the same speech as he gave Richter in the games. But Alucard, now fully confident in his identity, doesn't see a reason to choose. He battles his father one last time with the Crimson Stone at the center of it. This has been their tension since he was little. Because wolves move in tribes, he has trouble fighting alone, which makes Maria assist him by calling upon other wolves with her magic. Alucard fights his father up to his bedroom, that has meaning in this version. And then emotional Dracula gets regretful for the first time. After killing his father, Alucard gets severely injured and is helped by Maria. Death emerges in his final form and destroys the upper part of the castle. Just like in the Netflix version, Death reveals himself as a corpse and challenges Richter to a fight. Against a now purple sky emerging the blue and red energy, Death is overlooking the castle and the world. Richter receives the Crimson Stone from Alucard, combining the two to create the ultimate weapon. After an epic fight, he pierces through Death itself, finally putting an end to the terror of darkness and destroying the castle for good. With the stones destroyed, immortality and war has been combated with mortality and healing. Balance has been restored again. The moon, a symbol of femininity and loneliness, has been accompanying Dracula's grief, symbolizing Lisa's feminine love to him. With Zuva fueled by the sun, with it representing masculinity and life, the unconditional masculine love from her partner contrarily empowered her. While Lisa's death made Dracula isolated and lonely, Edward's death made Zuva connect to her ancestors, making her less lonely. In the end, Alucard bids farewell to Maria, believing the curse of his bloodline means he must disappear forever to protect the world. In his bloody wolf form, he takes off. But Maria follows him, knowing that he doesn't have to choose. Even symbolically, this plays into the dual nature of the show. Alucard, being half human, half vampire, feels like he has no place in this dual world with two sides. But since both evil and good can coexist again, Alucard does have a place. Richter and Zuva get closer and send off to find both of their families and unite them. The last scene shows the two seeing endless corpses and decapitated bodies while riding away. Zuva holds on to Richter even tighter, ending the story on a more romantic note, which calls back to Elisabetta holding on to Matthias in the stormy weather. Their union and eventual separation is what created Dracula. The world will always be scary. That's why you've got to hold on to your loved ones. And that would be my rewrite for Castlevania. A story about loneliness and isolation, and the light we find through community and support. I tried to take elements already existing in the games and using them to add onto a cohesive story. With this video, I wish for writers and producers who get this amazing opportunity to create a story with existing material, to truly delve into the established sources, and write a story that gives it the necessary justice and honor.